I'm seeing at the top of my screen, it says choose the hard way. And I think that's one thing that I will say in closing, that there is no substitution for hard work. I get asked all the time, how do you make it to the World Tour? And there are shortcuts people take, but they always come back and bite them in the ass in the end. Like there is no substitution for like putting your head down and just getting it done, whether that's business, sport, parenthood. Sometimes you can't go over it, you can't go through it, around it, you just have to go through it. And you really do have to go, through that hardship to get to where you want to end up.
I've wanted to have Ian Boswell on the show for a while, and the great day has finally come. It's the day when Hope, Maine, and Peacham, Vermont reach across the border to shake hands, unite, and activate for this interview. Ian Boswell rode at the highest level of professional cycling in Europe, and he started out there with Team Sky, at the time, the very best pro cycling team in the world. During his career, Ian competed in all three Grand Tours. That's the Giro d'Italia, the Vuelta a España, and the Tour de France. Along the way, he also had multiple severe concussions that led him to retire. Or did he? In 2021, Ian won the Unbound Gravel 200, and today he balances mixing it up at the pointy end of the most legendary gravel races in the United States and around the world, with a busy family life, taking care of a homestead, and working full-time for Wahoo, the fitness tech company. He also is a standout TikTok dancer, doing some collabs with Allison Jackson, winner of Paris-Roubaix Femmes and a previous Choose the Hard Way guest. We recorded this episode shortly after the 2023 Unbound Gravel 200, where Ian went to the line in the lead group and finished fifth, a few seconds behind the winner, Keegan Swenson. So let's get back to that question. Ian is retired from pro bike racing? Or is he retired? We talk about that and the many ways you win in those pursuits, even when you don't cross the finish line first, and what that brings to the rest of your life, and much more. You can find Ian on Instagram at Ian_Boswell. That link is in the show notes. Choose the Hard Way is a podcast about how doing hard things is fun. If you'd like to be in touch or suggest a guest, you can hit me at HardwayPod on social, and also at choosethehardway@gmail.com. And if you want to hear more episodes like this, please hit 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, and subscribe to the show. Are you newsletter curious? Don't die wondering. Go to choosethehardway.com to sign up and find out.
I am not that great at running in mud. Actually, I really hate mud. I grew up in Bend, Oregon, which is like high desert. It's like we get, it goes, I was just out there recently for a race, and it goes straight from like snow to sand. It's like growing up, I never rode in mud. I like wouldn't train in the rain. I live in New England now, so mud is more prominent, I guess, if you're going to be a cyclist. But even then, if it's like during mud season, like I don't ride my bike. Rasputitsa, thankfully, the 2 years I've done it. And then I guess we were both next to each other at the start line. It doesn't seem like mud season really happens in New England at the end of April anymore. I guess I just really enjoy keeping my equipment clean and in working order. So I really avoid mud at all costs. But this year at Unbound, we did have mud, which is kind of surprising that I did well considering we had those conditions. But I think it was more about how I approach the mud over my skills in the mud.
Well, that's kind of what this show is about. What are the skills that you take when you approach the mud that you might step into in life or work or whatever, right? So when you hit the mud, you probably knew that was coming based on your pre-ride the day before or intelligence you'd gathered, I would guess. So what was your strategy going into it?
Yeah, I mean, I knew this section was coming. Over the course of my sporting career, I have learned, for me, it works to not really see these technical sections. In 2018, I did the Tour de France, and we did this like Paris-Roubaix section over the cobblestones. And I didn't make the choice, but the team wanted to go recon the stage after Liège-Bastogne-Liège, which was a horrible idea because I had never ridden the cobbles of Roubaix. I knew I wasn't going to win the race. I was just there to like get through that stage because, we had a rest day and then we were in the Alps, which was kind of my time to do work for the team. And I learned there that for me, seeing something ahead of time makes it worse because then you start to think about it. You start to like overthink all these little details that you've already made a decision in your mind. When I left Vermont on Wednesday before Unbound, I knew the bike I was going to ride. I knew the tires I was going to ride. I'd already made those decisions. So when we get to Unbound, I didn't ride that section. I don't want to say intentionally, but again, I don't like getting my bike dirty. Like, is seeing it beforehand going to help anything, or is it just going to make me worry more, stress more? Make me like, oh, the night before I was over at the Specialized team house and they were all swapping tires and they'd gone from a 47 to a 42, and then they're like, oh, we should run a 38 tire. And they're asking me, I'm like, you know what? I already made this decision weeks ago of which tire I'm riding. It's on my bike. Even though we had mechanics there, it's like, I'm not going to. I guess one thing I really love about gravel is I try to do as much as I can myself. I'd already mounted my own tires, put the sealant in. If something goes wrong, I want it to be my fault, not someone else's fault. Like, oh, the mechanic didn't, do this right. It's like, I want it to be my responsibility. Um, so I didn't recon that section. I knew it was coming. I'd seen some pictures, but the way I approached it, and I think the way I've approached Unbound the 3 years I've done it now, is it's such a long event. It's 200 miles. It's anywhere from, I guess last year was 9 hours something. This year was 10 hours something. Um, there's so much time to make up for small mistakes, but big mistakes can really take you out of the race. So we came into this mud section. I was near the front before it, but all these people who are so eager to win the race and their goal is to win, they just went trudging straight up the middle of this muddy road. And within, 200 yards, they were at a standstill running to the side of the road. Meanwhile, I was a little bit further back, still near the front, but I saw a rider who I know fairly well, John Kariuki from Kenya on the team Amani. And he's a really smart and savvy rider. And I saw him go left onto the grass. And I was like, this kid is smart. I'm going to follow him. And also the benefit of having someone on the grass is that you can coming up. Um, so I was able to follow him up the side of the grass. And there were times that we had to run. And, for the first time in my life, I had carried a paint stick in my pocket just to get mud out. But it's something I did practice the night before. I took the paint stick to Freddy's Frozen Custard and ate some frozen custard with the paint stick. But that was pretty much it. And I guess that's kind of been my approach to Unbound over the last couple of years, is just playing the long game, but um, letting other people make those mistakes before I make the mistakes.
How did the paint stick take off? The last year I did the Unbound 100, and the last time I was in Emporia racing, I believe it was 2015. And at that time, I ran into Chris Carmichael the night before the race, and his recommendation to me was just carry a small flathead screwdriver, which is what I ended up taking with me. I did need it because, like you, we ran into this horrible mud bog situation. I think for us, it was about an hour into the race. I did end up having to run for about 45 minutes.
Wow.
And I did make the mistake. I made the mistake of riding directly into it. I'd done a lot of cyclocross. I was like, I can handle this. I got totally packed down. And then it was like a battle scene from Game of Thrones for the next 45 minutes. And every time I'd crest a hill, I was like, it's got to stop. And then you just see another 500 people from the 200 pushing bikes, removing derailleurs. It was just carnage. But how did the paint stick take off? Because everybody had one taped to their bike this year.
Yeah, well, I think the first year I went in 21, I think they actually handed them out in your bag. In like go get your race number, and you get a little swag bag with some chain lube and a koozie and a sticker, and there was a paint stick in there. And that was the second ever gravel race I did in 2021. I was like, do they have is like Sherman-Williams a sponsor of the race? I don't know why this is in here, because I just, like I said, I had never done cyclocross. I'd never done a big gravel race, so I didn't know what it was for. This year they did not put them in the bags. But I guess it really is like the optimal tool for, it's unlike a screwdriver. It's not going to kill you if you crash on it. You're not going to puncture a kidney if you have a screwdriver in your pocket. But it's light. They're super cheap. I actually like cut mine down. The place we were staying, there's little hacks on the garage, so I took a couple inches off it. Fits. I finished with it in my pocket, and I forgot about it until I got back to the house to shower. I was like, oh, I still have this in my pocket. And it's thin enough you can put it between your the crown of your fork and the wheel, and it oddly enough, it's probably good for about two things: stirring paint and getting mud out of a bike.
It sounds like you actually created a shiv, yeah, a knife-like implement used in prisons for violent attacks.
I actually
But
did. I even took it like once I was just messing around. Once I cut it off, there was like some little splinter. So I actually took it out on the concrete and actually like sharpened it up a little bit, like kind of just like a shiv. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, totally. You never know when you're going to need that. Well, that's interesting. So, did you end up having to use your paint stick at all during the race, or did it stay back in that jersey pocket the entire time?
No, I used it quite a bit, especially in that first, from mile 11 to 15 or something. Oftentimes while trying to like walk my bike and like, mostly get it out of the fork crown. Later on in the race, there was one point, probably like maybe mile 14 to 15, where I had it in my hand riding for like a full mile because I was like, cool, I'm gonna keep it, and like I was trying to think as I was riding. I was like, cool, it's okay if I try to push the mud out from the front, front of the fork, because if it gets caught, it's gonna kick it back out. And I was like about to put it in behind the fork. I was like, that's a bad idea because if this gets stuck in there, I'm just going to go straight over the handlebars. So I was trying to do some mud clearance as I was riding, but for the most part, it was when I was either stopped or, trying to walk with my bike or carry my bike while simultaneously, scraping mud out of, mostly just to keep the wheels spinning. Everything else, bikes these days are pretty robust. Everything else was operational outside of, you're not going to go too far with wheels that don't spin.
And at that moment in time, as you described, you kind of don't like to over focus on what are the obstacles you might run into in an event like this. You don't like to pre ride. Once you hit it, were you able to remain in a calm headspace?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there was a small group of riders who were just ahead of us. Keegan Svensson, who went on to win, and I was with Russell for a while. But people get so, especially at events, people get so caught up in like the energy of the event, and they're like trying to slam through gears, and they're getting frustrated, which never helps any situation. I mean, you were talking about you have a 6-year-old kid at home. It's like getting frustrated doesn't help anyone. So I was with Lachlan Morton actually, and like we could see the group ahead of us, and I was like, "Hey man, let's just keep it calm. We're 14 miles into a 205-mile race. There is no rush. Like we need to make sure we keep them in sight, but we don't need to catch them in this mud section. Like we have plenty of time and strength to catch them." And so almost using them as a guide, like literally like just keeping our eye up the road, like, hey, let's let them make the mistakes. Like I can see they're on the grass up here on the right, and then they're running across the road like, little chipmunks, and they're over on the left, running up the left side. So that must be the line, because there was enough people up the road that were trying different, approaches and different lines. Let's let them make the mistakes, and then we can kind of follow their tracks. And that worked out really well. And, then once we got out of the mud, our bikes were, I won't say clean, but, workable. That's when we can then close the gap. And, that's when we can then try to like catch back up to them. And it was amazing, especially this year at Unbound with the deepest field the race has ever had, to realize how much effort so many people had put into being on the start line, not just the financials of it, but the training and the, equipment and, mechanics and support staff. And to, after 15 miles, have a group of, there's maybe 10 of us, 12 of us, is crazy. I mean, like I said, as much as I despise riding in mud, I loved it because it just immediately eliminated all the chaos of Unbound. And there was just like a dedicated group of riders. And it's like, well, here we are. Like we survived. Let's just keep going.
And then where was your head at for the rest of the race? Like once you caught that group, you get into a front group. What were you thinking as you rolled through the rest of those miles?
I mean, there was a front group of like, maybe there was 6 or 7 riders. A couple of people had flats. I caught back up with Lachlan, John Kariuki, and Payson McCalvin was also with us. So we caught up, and I immediately just went to the front and started riding. Just knowing that, hey, I knew the other riders in the group. Keegan was there, Russell was there, Tendam wasn't there, and Pete Stettin or Peter Vakoch were not yet there. They caught us just after that. But I knew that this was such a good group, and I know Keegan and Russell fairly well. I guess I also know their style of riding, where they're just kind of like me in an idiotic way. They just want to ride hard. Like they don't want to play games. Like, hey, let's just pull through and ride hard. And that's exactly what happened. And I knew if I started pulling through and like right when I got to that group, they were going to understand like, hey, everyone here is committed. We've got a really strong group of riders. Everyone's committed to, first off, opening a gap to the people behind us, making sure that more riders aren't going to tag on. Because if we started, kind of noodling around, it's pretty quick that, that group could have swelled to, 20 riders, 30 riders, 50 riders have we had we kind of taken it easy long enough. Um, and without really talking, it was pretty instant where it's like, hey, this is the group, this is the selection, let's ride. And we did that all the way until the first aid station. A couple people had mechanicals and dropped off. Like I said, Pete Stetna, Peter Bakoch, and Tendam caught us. And that was a great addition to the group, because those are also powerhouses that you don't want chasing behind, because they will they will catch you at some point if they're not with you.
Were there any moments that are sticking with you when you hit those next 180 miles or so?
Um, you've done Unbound. It amazes me how quickly the event goes. Living in Vermont, the roads are always up, down, left, right. So you could do a 5-hour ride and it goes pretty quickly. When you go do a training ride in Kansas, as beautiful as the Flint Hills are, it's kind of boring. It's just cool. You're straight for 15 miles, left turn, straight for 20 miles. It's a big, everything's just, north, south, east, west, and big, long, straight roads. But because the Flintstones are so notorious for flat tires, you're constantly focusing. Here in Vermont, you never flat. It's like you could I can ride the same tire for 2 seasons and not have a flat tire. But there, flat tires happen all the time. So if we're in a pace line and we have 2 people, and just because the nature of cars push the bigger stones out of the way, so there's kind of 2 tracks. There's a bit thicker gravel in the middle. So as you're pace lining, the people going forward will be in one lane, the people coming back will be in the other lane. So with 8 riders, you're crossing over that center patch every 45 seconds, every minute, twice. You're going in the front and in the back of the group. And I assume everyone in the group kind of thinks the same way. You're really looking, where can I cross this? Where's the safe spot to cross this? Can I cross it at an angle? Is there a big rock coming up? So despite it being so long, you're constantly engaged, which is also crazy because, there was only 8 of us and we did very little talking for 10 hours. And maybe, as you can tell, I'm a very social person and I enjoy talking. So it really is, for a 10-hour event, it flies by really quickly.
And there's been a lot of, I don't know if I would say controversy, there's been a lot of discussion about the text messaging that was going down among the riders in your group. Were you all just sending each other selfies, or what was happening?
I did not send any text messages during the event. My cell phone's a bit old now and my battery dies out way too quickly.
Got a Nokia brick.
Yeah. No, but and I knew Keegan and Russell were going to do this ahead of time. They did it last year as well. And, one of the, I don't know if it's a rule, but maybe it is a rule of Unbound, is you're supposed to carry a phone. I guess it pertains to the elite riders, but you think how many people, especially this year, broke something, had a flat tire at some point, and, there's no follow car. You need to get back to Emporia somehow. So having a phone is, very needed in most situations and for, almost every rider. So what they were doing is they were essentially just texting ahead to the aid stations saying, every rider has a plan. When I come into the aid station, I'm going to get, 2 bottles, a hydration pack, and whatever, some gels or bars, or, some people pizza and a hamburger. So they were just texting ahead to the mechanics saying hey, this is what I need, which is, it's completely within, I guess the rules of the race, considering you have to have a phone. It doesn't bother me because I could do that just as well if I wanted to. I could carry a phone and make a phone call. One thing that they both also had was headphones. They don't have headphones like I'm wearing, but they have those. I don't even know if they're called shocks or something. They're like those vibrating headphones.
Right.
So they were listening to music, which again I think is tons of people do that out on course. I am finding that becoming more dangerous now, though, especially less for the elite group. But as we start to catch 100-mile finishers and we're saying, hey, we're on your left, and someone's listening to a podcast or listening to music and they don't hear us coming up. And that's dangerous for them and for us because, maybe at the last minute they swerve right or left, even though we're trying to make noise to let them know we're coming. But again, for some people, if you're out there by yourself for, the 100-mile course or the 200-mile course, I would definitely want music if I was by myself. So I don't know what the best thing for them to do there is. But as far as the cell phones go, I think I don't have a problem with it. I think if I had a choice, and I will make this recommendation to the Unbound staff, I think it would be really cool if, for the elite category, the aid stations were self-supported. So not you couldn't have outside staff. So I did Cape Epic this spring, which is a 8-day mountain bike race, and
Yeah.
I wasn't in the pro category, so we just filled up our own bottles and stuff. But the elite riders can have a mechanic come and set up their station. They can put a box there with spare wheels and tires and derailleurs and chains, everything that they need there, but they can't receive assistance. And I think that would be a really cool addition to the Unbound Elite field, especially because we do have separate starts now. Where if you come into the aid station, you can have your mechanic or friend or husband or wife set up a table and lay out all your stuff as you want, but you can't have someone come and help you change a tire, put a hydration pack on, because we were really fortunate this year that it was such a small group at the first aid station, because people are now doing, they'll dump their hydration pack as they come in, they'll grab one halfway down, they'll maybe stop, maybe not, which works if there's 8 riders. But if we came into that aid station with 70 people, it's going to be mayhem with people trying to grab packs from the side of the road and dropping stuff. Um, but if it was self-supported, um, I think it would just add another element to gravel, which I think is cool. That you have to know your own bike. You have to know how to fix it. If you want to hose it off, you can. Someone can set it up for you, but you have to do it yourself. And I think just also to limit the level of entry. I saw some videos afterwards of people coming into the aid station. They had 5 people. Someone grabs the bike, someone does the bottle, someone does the chain. I'm like, I had 2 guys from Wahoo who, they're not mechanics. They work with me at Wahoo Fitness, and they just literally, I'm like, we're just going to keep this as simple as we can. I'm just going to hand me my bottles and my hydration pack, and that's it. And then I'm going to keep riding. Like, that's all I did at the aid stations. I think the last one it was like 3 seconds of stoppage time. And, I think that's like a choice that you want to make. If you don't have, if you need to bring 5 people there with you, you're looking at several $1,000s for flights, lodging, rental cars, which just it favors the people who and teams and athletes that have that level of support, and it really limits people, especially who are coming from Europe, and it's already super expensive to take a trip over, and all of a sudden you realize, oh, I also need 5 people to do a Formula One pit stop on my bike. Um, I think it would add a little bit more, I don't know, adventure to the race as well if you had self-supported. But I don't know, I have a lot of opinions on things, and I think sometimes people don't always agree with what I have to say or how I think about it.
Well, Ian, I'd love to hear more of those opinions, and I'm grateful that you're here today to share them. Watching the videos from different riders who did post-race recaps. I caught Kerry Werner's video of the mud section. I'm hoping to get Kerry on here soon. Big fan of his work. But looking at the pit stops, you're right. I mean, it is at an F1 level now. It's bananas, right? You've got people, 2 mechanics on one side, 2 mechanics on the other side, the bottles, the packs, hydration, food, everything. Another thing that stuck out to me, and when I saw photos of the finish, I was wondering if I was looking at Photoshopped images. You were actually there, so I want to ask you directly. It looked like you had a lot of riders who probably were doing the 150 or 25 in the chute, while you had 7 world-class athletes trying to sprint for the finish. Is that actually what went down, and what was that like?
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened. I mean, it's happened the last 2 years, I guess. I can't actually recall in 2021 if Lawrence and I had anyone else in the chute at
It
the same time
looked
as us.
clear when I looked at the photos today.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
we did have some people in the chute last year when it was a sprint of 4 of us or 5 of us. I mean, it is crazy. I saw a video as well. And when you're in it, you don't see it. Like you're just like, you see your line and you're like, cool, I'm on. This is my line. Like everything else is kind of a blur. But looking at a video, I was like, there was some guy, in front of Keegan, like taking a selfie.
Yeah.
This is his
Right.
year long challenge and goal to come here and ride Unbound. He's crossing the finish line, taking a picture as Keegan sprinting at whatever 1200 watts. Um, it is it is dangerous. I mean, I think the event is fortunate that nothing has happened. I also do foresee going forward, unless I mean, maybe the northern course. I'm not sure when you did Unbound. It's a little bit more. There's some hills later in the race, so it could actually break it up. But just having observed the race the last 2 years, everyone is so fatigued. Even the elite riders. Everyone is the top. your 10% of your acceleration is just gone. So you can attack, people made attacks in the final, 5-10 miles, but you can't maintain it. So you attack and then you're kind of off the front, you kind of just get sucked back into the group of riders chasing. And I think that's going to continue to happen unless, Pogacar or Wout van Aert, someone who's just on a completely different level. But of the riders who are there now, the difference between us is so small. You really can't get away in the final. There's no, the running back into Emporia, it's pretty smooth, it's relatively flat. You're so fatigued that you can attack, but you can't maintain, that attack long enough to where you're going to get a gap. So I mean, honestly, I think that for the next, who knows, maybe indefinitely or until there's a muddy section late on in the race, that you are going to see a bunch finish. And something, I mean, probably needs to be done. I don't really know what to do because I guess I also really value the people that this is just as much their event as it is the elite event. So you can't tell them to stop. And oh, here's my daughter coming in. You can't
Awesome.
you can't hold
Welcome.
them, at the university and say, hey, you guys need to stop here because the elite riders are coming in. You can't prioritize their event over our event. You could potentially do two shoots where it's like, hey, the elite riders are coming in. They're going to, shoot up the left side here. But even that, I know that there's some concern. And I guess being on the fire department here in Peacham, they need those lanes on the side in case there is a fire. So, so they can only close down one lane. They can't close down the whole road. Yeah, you have a baby. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it really is like a concern that they're going to have. And I think, I mentioned to someone at Lifetime of possibly splitting the days, doing the, open category, the 50, the 100, the mass start 200 event on Saturday. And then on Sunday doing the elite event. That would also give the women their own race where they're not going to be caught by the men. It would give everyone else an opportunity to, especially if they can really nail in the live coverage where they have a jumbotron downtown and everyone gets to sit downtown and watch the elite riders race. They just, oh, hey, they're coming up to this section up here. Remember this from yesterday? That would be really cool. But I know logistically closing down a town for 2 days becomes a huge inconvenience.
Do you have any interest in racing I don't even know what they're called, but the UCI World Tour level gravel events? Does that have any appeal to you?
No, not to me. Which is, I guess I'm in I don't say a unique position. I guess I came to gravel with a very different perspective than I guess a lot of my competitors. I never expected my gravel career to be a career. I left the World Tour in end of 2019, 2020.
Right.
Very much retired. And I still love riding my bike. And then the pandemic happened, and I stopped training and just like really fell in love with riding my bike and exploring. But with my job at Wahoo, I knew I was going to be at events. And slowly I kind of got fit again just because I loved riding fast, and it's fun to test yourself. And most of my training, to be honest, is going after my own Strava KOMs around my house here in Peacham. It's most of my efforts are just like, hey, can I go faster up this climb than I did last year or 2 weeks ago? So I guess I still want to keep it fun. And for me, road cycling, gravel cycling, it's still fun for me to go fast. But to sign up for, the Lifetime Grand Prix series or the UCI stuff, I kind of am worried if I do stuff like that. It's kind of like stepping back into what I left behind, where it's like you're racing for results, you're chasing points, you're trying to get a contract, you're trying to get new sponsors. It's different in many ways, but at the same time, I feel like that chapter of my life is I got to experience that, and I feel very fortunate, and I'm glad that there are those opportunities for young athletes now, especially in North America, because road racing has almost disappeared. But they have the opportunity to chase a career and make a career in gravel, mountain bike, kind of this mixed surface racing. But for me, it's I told myself before this year at Unbound, like, cool, this is my last year racing bikes. Like, I'm done with it. Like, I'm going to go to Unbound one more time, and that'll be it. Okay, I finished fifth again. It's like, okay, well, maybe I could do another year of it. I don't know. And maybe it's not Unbound. I still love, I've had the opportunity this year to go to a bunch of smaller events in different areas. One out in Oregon where I grew up. I went down to an event in Mississippi, Cape Epic. events that I otherwise wouldn't have done. And I guess if I added, the Lifetime Grand Prix or the UCI events to my calendar, I only have so many trips in me a year just with, family and job and, our house here, that those would be taking away trips of events that I really want to go to. Events I would love to do an event in South America. I'd love to go back to Japan for, in some capacity, whether it's a bike race or I know there's a Grinduro event over there. Um, Unbound is kind of like the event that you kind of need to go to. It's the crown jewel. But yeah, as far as the UCI stuff, I mean, I think it's just at this point in my life, it's not my cup of tea. I don't feel like I need to prove anything in gravel racing, which I mean sounds weird because I'm still competitive at the events I go
Yeah.
to, but I also feel, and I've had this thought for a while, like we've had and we still have the opportunity to measure gravel differently. Do we really, in my opinion, like I said, most people disagree with this who are young and up and coming, and I see why they want a world champion. But I'm like, why do we need the best? Why do we need to have a world champion? Why can't we have, well, Keegan's kind of also wrecked this because he just wins every race in North America, but why can't we have, hey, you were the best on this day at BWR, and you were the best on this day at Unbound, and you were the best at, Gravel Worlds in Nebraska? Um, Maybe it's just more of a thought of like, I think it's really cool when that success can be shared. And even sometimes success doesn't have to be winning. It can be, how people are riding in the group and how people, Ted King at Gravel Locos, stopped to help Payson after he had his concussion. Like, can that not be the win? I guess I have a different perspective now than I had when I was, 25 years old, and all that mattered was trying to win and try to be the best. At this point, I see that there's a lot more value to a broad range of kind of accomplishments, and I hope and I see gravel is recognizing that, but we do still have the opportunity to measure success differently than just having the best rider or the world champion. I feel like there's so many more levels and depth to the best that we could find than just the first person to cross the line.
What do you get out of participating in these events? Because as you noted, when you left the world tour, and I'd love to dig into that and talk about it a little bit more, which we can get to in a minute. But, Unbound is not a short event. And even if you're just running, riding around chasing KOMs, I have to imagine you're putting a pretty substantial amount of time into training. You have a family, you have a job. Do you consider yourself retired still at this point from competitive cycling?
I mean, it's a tricky question. I would say no, because I still do put a lot of time. I still do put a lot of time. And I guess I've kind of shot myself in the foot with that one by being competitive. Like I could have just like, hey, I'm just going to like go to these events and ride easy. Um, but it's still, for me, is really fun to ride fast. And I guess I do know that that won't be the case forever. Um, a couple weeks prior to Unbound, two friends came and met me at my house in Peacham. One came up from Upper Valley in New Hampshire, and one came down from Quebec, and we did this. They both wanted to do this Unbound training ride, so I mapped out a 120-mile loop, and it was 13,000 feet of climbing, which is a ride I never really do by myself. Even in years past, I've never done a ride that big. Getting ready for Unbound, turned into 7.5 hours, and we rode at pretty much the same pace we would ride Unbound at. And I realized there that I got the same sort of satisfaction of that ride as I do from Unbound, riding really hard and really long with really strong people. And I that's one thing living in Vermont that I don't get a lot of. There's cyclists here, but there's not a lot of racing cyclists, or there's not a lot of people who want to ride at my speed for 5 hours, and so sometimes for me, it's going to Unbound or going to SBT or events that I get to experience that, and I just, it's something I don't get at home. Um, and you know what it's like being an athlete. It's those endorphins. It's that feeling of like, hey, I did it. I accomplished it. And I'm maybe like most people out there who do endurance sports, I'm so much more productive after doing a long, hard ride than I am before, which makes no sense. That I can go thrash myself and I come back and I'm in a better headspace. I'm thinking more clearly. I'm happier. Um, so yeah, I mean, I still put in the effort and obviously the work that it requires to do Unbound. At the same time, though, I look at what everyone else is doing. I'm like, oh wow, I almost have like this imposter syndrome. Like looking at Keegan and Russell train for Unbound out in Tucson before the race. I'm like, I can't keep up with those guys. I don't have 30 hours a week or 25 hours a week to ride my bike. So I guess I do what I can, and fortunate in the sense that I do have a history in the past of racing at a high level. So you have those miles in your legs, you have that knowledge, you kind of have that depth. Um, so I'm fortunate that probably I can get to that level with less effort. Well, not less effort, with less training time, but just maximizing the time that I do have.
You have a bit of base.
Yes, I've got a couple years in my legs at this point. Yeah.
Yeah, I got a few years in your legs when you pull up. So when you think about your time in the world tour, what did you enjoy about those years? And is there anything from that experience that you're getting out of what you're doing now?
I mean, I'm sure this probably shifts all the time of what I enjoyed about it. I guess now in reflection, my friend Larry Warbass was over for Unbound, who's still racing the world tour on AG2R. Um, I guess what I enjoy about it now is that I achieved what I wanted to as a kid. I mean, it sounds strange when I speak to my friends because a lot of them are elite cyclists. And, we all made it we're friends because we were all racing in the world tour. We were at the grand tours together. But when I take a step back and realize that, I grew up on the west coast of the US, that's really far from Europe. And, watching the Tour de France on TV as a 10, 11, 12-year old and thinking, hey, I want to go there one day and I want to do that. And to realize that I got there and I achieved that. Did I win the Tour de France? No. I mean, the closer I got to the top, I realized the top is further away than it is from going from Oregon to the World Tour is from where I finished in the Tour to the top. Um, but I think that's what I miss most is it was like a childhood dream that I got to live that life. I got to, live in Europe for 8 years. I got to race with the best athletes in the world on the biggest teams on the best equipment. Um, I don't miss really anything. I guess it's more admiration for what I did achieve, and kind of the work that went into that and the people that supported me to get there, my family and the sacrifices that I made that paid off, because I feel like we all make sacrifices to try to achieve something and sometimes it doesn't work out. And the fact that I, you know, whether it was the right place, right time, but I was, started somewhere and I got to where I wanted to go. And I think it's more kind of being proud of what I achieved and accomplished and where I got to over I mean, of course I miss having a team chef and, having someone do my laundry on a grand tour and, getting a massage when you want. But those are all kind of superficial things. You can go out to a restaurant, you can, well, probably in Peacham, you probably couldn't find someone to do your laundry, but those are all things that, they're luxuries, but they're not necessarily things that I miss, and I guess that's why I've kind of come to love gravel is because I also do enjoy looking after myself. I have enjoyed learning how to work on my own bike and learning about the equipment and, technique and all that kind of stuff.
When you were a little kid, like before these years when you kind of became fascinated by the Tour de France and had this dream of going to the world tour, what were you into and what were you like?
I mean, as a kid, both me and my younger brother were always into sports. I mean, whether it was I played basketball, I played football, we did track and field, we would do fishing, hiking, backpacking, cycling. My dad was a triathlete in the 80s. My mom did some mountain bike stuff in Oregon, so the bike was kind of always there, and it was always like from the minute I could first learn how to ride, it was also like a mode of transportation and a mode of freedom. To go ride down to my friend's house or to ride to school. It was like a sense of independence. When I was, goodness, maybe 8 or 9, we had a little, like, the road I grew up on in Bend, we had like a Tour Saginaw. My dad had an old yellow winning jersey magazine, yellow jersey that we would race to the park and back. And we had, 5 stages around different, courses, a time trial and a bunch sprint. And so I was aware of cycling at a pretty young age, especially for an American kid in the 90s. Um, but there was always, we were just always active. That's something that's kind of always been a common thread through my life is physical, physical exercise, just being outdoors and then, whether it's playing or whether it's, competition, doing stuff outside.
And when you got to the world tour, and I know that you left the world tour because of things related to concussion, TBI, but prior to that, were there any moments when you felt like, I don't actually know if I can cut it? Or did you always have a high level of confidence and you just carried it through?
I would say I've always had a pretty low level of confidence. You know, when I first signed with Team Sky in 2012, I signed. First season was 2013. Um, I signed a 3-year contract at the time, which is a really long contract in those days for a young rider who, I had raced in Europe, but I'd never lived in Europe. And I remember drafting like a couple of emails to Dave Brailsford, who was the team principal. It's a British term for like team manager. Um, like drafting emails of like, you know what, like I don't deserve to be on this team. You should give this spot to someone else. Just because I wasn't performing. I guess I knew. I mean, I was also 21 years old and I was on the best team in the world. We went to every race we went to, we were winning. We had the best riders. They just won the Tour de France the year before. They won the Tour, I think, every year that I was at the team almost. Um, so there was a level of kind of lacking self confidence, just being surrounded by greatness from such a early age in the World Tour. Um, but I mean, I guess I just kind of kept working. I never sent that email, thankfully, so I kept my job. Um, but I think I was just also going through a lot at the time. I was 20, 21, 22. I was living in Europe. I was trying to learn how to live life in a foreign country while simultaneously train with the best athletes in the world. So I think that really took a lot of additional energy just to survive, while trying to train. Getting a phone. When I was in Europe at ages 21, 22, and I was instantly surrounded by the best athletes in the world, and I wasn't performing to the team's expectations or my expectations. And as I was trying to learn how to train like a world tour rider, I was also trying to get a life set up in a foreign country without speaking French very well, without having, family around, or, I had friends, but they were also within cycling. So if they were doing well, I was like, oh, I don't want to hang out with them because I'm kind of struggling. So I'll just like kind of stay by myself and, try to figure out, cool, how do I get a cell phone? Where do I, how do I go about getting a French driver's license or a visa to live in the country? So I was immediately thrown into this world of the best athletes in the world who are performing every week in, week out at the races while trying to set up a life. And, thankfully, like I said, had 3 years on the contract. And before the final year of that contract at Sky, I kind of had finally figured out all the stuff off the bike. I'd become settled and comfortable in France. I learned how to train at that level. My body had kind of caught up with, I guess my lifestyle, and then started to perform. And then I kind of like, cool. And now I actually, kind of belong here. But I mean, I had the same lack of confidence even this year at the start line of Unbound. Like, why am I getting a call up? Because I was third last year. Like, this is weird. I see all these people and the amount of time and energy they've had for training and like all their support staff. And I was like, I don't have all this. I've got great sponsors and partners, but I also don't want 5 people there, spending their weekend to look after me because, Unbound's kind of a crapshoot. You could flatten the first 10 minutes and then you have 5 people waiting at the aid station for you never showing up. Um, but I also think I don't really, I guess I do a good job or a bad job of not putting pressure on myself in that regard of, not over promising things, performance wise, because I know sport can be incredibly, unpredictable.
When those feelings showed up for you on Team Sky, how did you deal with them?
I mean, I remember a lot of like doing really funny things. At the time it was before GPS bike computers, so we had an old SRM, and you're supposed to upload your, now when you finish a ride, especially with my Wahoo, I finish, I get home, I save it. It's sent to my Training Peaks, it's sent to my Strava, it's sent to, the Wahoo app. Like there's no hiding, like you did a ride, everyone knows about it. In those days, you had to plug in your SRM to your computer, download it, send it. And there were times when I would like, you know, upload like I didn't do the training I was supposed to. I had a coach and was telling me what to do, and I would like delete the file because I was like, oh, my SRM just didn't work today, because I didn't do the ride or I didn't feel good. Um, you know, fully knowing that like there was an expectation of me to do the training. I didn't feel good. I didn't feel confident enough to also tell the team or the coach like, hey, I'm not feeling well, or this isn't working out. Um, so there were those circumstances when I just completely kind of, yeah, pulled the wool over their eyes. But it wasn't for lack of trying. It's just things weren't working out. I think I was really struggling. just to like feel, comfortable in Europe, living there, doing the training, because it was a huge training load as well. Back in, 2013, 19, 20 year olds were not doing 20 plus hour training weeks and, training like world tour riders at a young age, which now they are. Now coaches are tracking your sleep, your blood glucose, your training, they're tracking everything. And there's really no hiding, what you're up to. But, just 10 years ago, you could kind of like, oh yeah, I did the training ride, but it just, something happened in the file. And okay, whatever, like, get back to it tomorrow. Um, I think my thought was, I mean, it's hard to go back and think about that, but I guess I never pulled the plug. I stayed in Europe. I kept doing the training. You have ebbs and flows, and I kind of gradually like would, maybe it was 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Eventually I got to the point where, I started getting selected for bigger races. I was, feeling more part of the team, like I was a valuable member of the team rather than, oh, this is just that young American guy who showed a lot of promise but hasn't really delivered. I finally started to kind of find my way in the sport and, gain that confidence, which was, it was a good reminder as well that like I was in a very fortunate position to be where I was, because at the time, there was a lot of kids who would have, given anything to be in my position. And so to also recognize that, you know, that sentiment as well, that I was where I wanted to be and I had done the things to deserve to be there. Um, but now is the time to kind of show that, and I think that was one of the biggest mistakes I made when I joined the world tour. Was for so long, you have annual goals, you have, monthly goals. I want to do this race, I want to train this much, I want to, but underline all of that from the age of 10 or 12 was, I want to make it to the biggest team in the world, I want to be on the best team. And the minute I signed a contract for the team, I had checked off a huge goal in my life. I had met this goal that had kind of been underlying everything up to that point. And when I got there, I didn't reassess, okay, well, what's my next goal? It was kind of like, sweet, I'm here. I made it. I signed, I just signed a 3-year contract with the biggest team in cycling, but I never set goals from there, going forward from there, because all of a sudden I was on a big team and you kind of assume, oh, they'll set goals for me and they, they'll look after me. But I never did that myself. And so my third year at Team Sky, I met with a friend who was in Nice, an older gentleman who was an American but worked for a French company, and he was ran a business, and he's like, Ian, where's your business plan? I'm like, I don't have a business plan. I'm just at this team, and looking in hindsight, I had done that throughout my whole career, and then I got to the World Tour and I stopped setting goals. And so throughout that winter, after my first 2 years at Sky, I kind of threw out the baby with the bathwater and reset everything. I was like, cool, I'm going to set a specific goal of things that I have direct control over. Like, here's how much time I'm going to train. Here's how much time I'm going to spend on my time trial bike, or I'm going to spend studying race footage. But then I also set goals that I would wanted to achieve, but that the team had more control of. I wanted to do a grand tour. I wanted to be top 15 in a world tour time trial. I wanted to be one of the last mountain domestiques. And like, as much time as I put into that during the season, I never really looked at it. But it is amazing how if you set these goals at some point and you just like, you've written them down, they're subconsciously in there, and slowly you start to chase them and tick them off. Even without like, I wasn't annually going, or, every quarter going through, oh, how am I stacking up against my goals? But I had set these goals and slowly I was like achieving them, which is what I did throughout my young career to get to the world tour. I started doing that in the world tour to, achieve the goals of, riding the Grand Tour or being top 3 on a stage or riding the Tour de France. It all started to happen because I had, kind of just reinstilled this idea of like, goal setting is really important.
Were you able to share about the experience that you were having, particularly as it relates to kind of self-confidence in your own identity with your teammates at the time, or did you feel hyper competitive with your peers?
There were teammates that I mean, fortunate at the time, there were some other young riders at Team Sky. There was an individual, Nathan Earl, who was Tasmanian, and we were kind of both in the same boat. Like, we were at the races, we would sometimes do okay, oftentimes wouldn't really perform. So we like really bonded. We would train together, we'd go out to dinners together, we'd spent a lot of time together, but we would kind of avoid, because I lived in Nice, France, which is, just next door to, more or less next door to Monaco, which is where all the stars live. Richie Port and Chris Froome and Gilbert, all the Geraint Thomas, all the, the big wigs on the team. So we would see them, but we knew that they were kind of on another level of, they were the best riders in the world. And I guess also by not hanging out with them as much, you're also not comparing yourself to them constantly. And I guess that's kind of like a huge reminder that I learned through this. And what I said earlier about, what I miss about the world tour is that, I was comparing myself against legends of the sport. I wasn't comparing myself to the kids I grew up racing with, what I had accomplished compared to what they accomplished. I was comparing myself of, oh, well, Froome just won the Dauphiné or Richie Port just won Catalunya. It's like, that's a pretty, those are pretty good athletes to compare yourself to. Like, you may never achieve half of what they achieved. So I think kind of resetting what I was measuring myself against and measuring myself against myself rather than measuring myself against the world tour riders. So I think there was a moment there where, yeah, I would tend to hang out with kind of riders on the team who were more along my level and my caliber of rider.
When your world tour career reached its end, I'm guessing that's not the way that you anticipated that you would leave the world tour. So what happened and how did you feel about it?
Yeah, so I had a crash in the spring of 2019 at the Tirreno Adriatico. I had a crash, don't really know how it happened, but I went over the front of the handlebars and suffered a concussion, like a TBI. And I had a number of crashes and concussions throughout my career, but this one was different. The recovery was a lot longer, and I was, I guess, 28 at the time. I think 28. And in many ways, like, kind of, I guess cycling's changed in the last 5 years, but at the time was kind of coming into the prime of my career as far as being a Grand Tour rider. Not to win, but to be a domestique for the team's leader. Um, and at the time it was a crash. Cool, you're going to take a week off. You'll come back and you'll ride Tour California, and then you'll ride the tour in July. That was very much still my plan. But the longer the recovery took, the more time I spent away from the sport, and I'd actually come back to Vermont for the first time outside of an off season ever. From when I signed my contract in first season in 2013, I pretty much lived in Europe full time. I would come back oftentimes, for maybe a month or two in the winter, but that's off season. You're not training. Vermont's also a terrible place to try to train for a professional cyclist in November, December. So I actually came back in the spring, and I guess that time I didn't race the rest of the season. So from March or April 2019, I there's a couple times I thought I was going to come back, but just the lingering symptoms from the crash and the recovery and everything, just it wasn't feasible to come back that year. And so during that time, I kind of started to have some of these thoughts of like, wow, I actually accomplished a lot in my career. And also the previous year, Geraint Thomas had won the tour, not, I want to say unexpectedly, because he's really, kind of become one of the, favorites of any Grand Tour he goes to, but somewhat, unexpectedly won the Tour de France ahead of, Dumoulin and Chris Froome. And I told him once we rode into Paris, I was like, dude, you should just end your career now. Like, on the Champs-Elysees, take the yellow jersey, make a thank you speech, and just mic drop and get out of here. And I realized through that process of recovery that, like, there's never an end for an athlete, and this is one thing that kind of still puzzles me. Even, why did I go back to Unbound the last 2 years? I don't know, because you win something once, it's like, oh, can you win it again? Oh, can you win 5 Tour de France's? Can you win, the Giro and then the Tour de France, or can you win Unbound and then Leadville? It's just like, there's never an end to it. And I guess that's what I realized is, like, I had accomplished a lot by the age of 28. I had ridden the Tour de France, I'd ridden the Vuelta 3 times, I'd ridden the Giro, I'd, spent 8 years living in Europe as a, a young man, which is like, how cool is that to be able to live in Europe full time, fully integrate into a culture and speak the language and, cook the cuisine and travel the world. My wife and I got married that year. And I realized, like, what am I chasing? Like, what, cool, maybe if I stayed in the world tour another 5 years, I could, maybe I could win a stage in the tour, or I could, sign a bigger contract, but ultimately you're always chasing something. And I guess that was the moment when I stopped chasing and started to like embrace what I had, what I had done, what I was doing. Um, and also the concussion played a big factor in it. Obviously I'm still racing my bike today. For me, gravel's much safer because I can kind of assess the risk that I want to take. Um, but in pro road racing, it was also a case of, it's not a matter of if I crash again, it's when. If you're on a wet descent in the Dolomites, like you can't just let the wheel go and be like, oh, I'll close it when I get to the bottom. Like you're not going to close that gap. In gravel, as I kind of said through the mud, I can let the guys go up the road, and the speed is low enough that if I'm strong enough, I'll close the gap. If I can't close it, I can't close it. But I'm not going to race down this descent to try to keep on these guys' wheel because I just don't want to crash, and I can't call my wife from the hospital again, be like, hey, honey, I hit my head again. I suffered another concussion. Um, so a lot changed in that time, and I think a lot of athletes, if they ever had a forced sabbatical, I think they would kind of approach things differently, and I definitely did. But um, yeah, I mean, I like I said, I still love the sport. I still admire what those riders are doing in the World Tour. I don't want to do it again. If a team came and offered me, a huge contract to go back and race, I'd be like, you know what, I've ticked that box. I feel super fortunate that I had that chance to race those races and live that lifestyle. But I'm a different person now than I was, from 2013 to 2019.
And you mentioned during that third year at Sky, when you had your friend who ran a business, you kind of started to set some new goals for yourself, a new business plan for your life and your professional life, so to speak. When you think about today and what you're doing now with your family, with your professional life at Wahoo, with you as a bike racer, what do you want to be getting out of all of the different things that you're doing?
I've really thrown a wrench in my own spokes by doing well in bike racing again. As much as I don't want this to come across as like cocky or arrogant, but like it's almost a curse that I'm doing as well as I am. Because if I went to Unbound this year and I just got my butt kicked, the writing's on the wall. You know what? I'm going to hang up my wheels. I'm going to come back to Vermont, and I'm just going to spend time with my family and work on our little homestead. But I'm still performing. And as much as I love that, it's also like I still have it in me. I still am able to do it. And so I guess my internal question now, after this year's Unbound, is just because I can do it, does that mean I should do it? And that's something I really am struggling with, because like I said, I told my wife, hey, honey, this is my last year racing. Next year I'll be home more. I won't spend as much time riding my bike on the weekends. I'll help you with, more things around the house. We have, we live in an old farmhouse. There's an endless list of things to do and an endless, list of skills that I need to learn and want to learn. And every year I continue racing, I feel like I'm just kicking the ball down the field. Like, oh, I'll just do it next year. Oh, I'll fix that next year. Well, it's been, 3 years now of me playing in gravel. um, but I do know that at some point there will be an end because, I'm not going to, I can't be fast forever. I still do love riding my bike. So I guess for me at this point, it's more of if I were to stop, would I miss it? Or could I have that clean cut like I had with professional road racing when it's like, you know what, this is out of my system now. I'm ready to do something new and different. Um, but I guess the biggest difference is I've been much more successful, oddly, in gravel racing than I was in road racing, trying less hard. If that, I don't say trying less hard, but like I'm not, I'm living a much more balanced life than I was in the World Tour. And I think, ironically, had I done this in the World Tour, I would have been more successful. It's funny how like with age you learn so much and like you change your values and your perspectives and you kind of the balance in which you go about your day, and you take some of that pressure off. When I was 25 years old living in France by myself racing the World Tour, that's all I was thinking about. Everything was just about the singular mission of being the best rider you can. Now it's, I'm, as you saw, I'm on this podcast with my daughter's in, I just heard the smoke alarm go off. I'm on the fire department. I get calls at 2 a.m. to go, help someone who's lost in the snow, all these other things that are distractions from the thing I love most, riding my bike, but things that probably enhance me riding my bike because they take your mind off of, you know, that pursuit. It adds a level of like appreciation when I do get the free time to go out on my bike ride and my phone's not ringing, or, our daughter's, taking a nap. I'm like, oh, cool, I can go out and do 2 or 3 hours and come back and like, oh, I don't feel like that was a pleasure to get out and ride. It wasn't like a job to get out and ride.
Do you still sweat recovery? Because just when I hear the mix of things you just described, you're getting the call in the middle of the night for the volunteer fire department, potentially. I don't know how your daughter sleeps. I have small kids. There are rumors that sometimes they disrupt your sleep. So you might not be getting that world tour level recovery. Or are you? Is that still something that's super important in your order of operations?
No, my recovery now is pretty horrible. Our daughter was up last night from midnight to 3 a.m. with who knows what, her teeth are coming in, or she had a nightmare. I don't know what it was, but I couldn't have. I don't know how people in the world tour have a kid because your recovery is so important, and of course it is important now. But I'm not putting in the same training load that I was in the world tour. I'm more preparing for 1 day events versus 3 week events. So I think that as important as the recovery is, I can get by with maybe not focusing as much on recovery. And I think for me, just being kind of a busy mind, I think sometimes having those other, like I said, those other distractions is actually helpful. To have all these other things going on in my life, as much of a distraction I know as it is to my sport, it also brings me a lot of value and kind of joy and pleasure outside of the bike. And that's kind of where this whole, struggle comes with having other opportunities away from the bike. I know that if I stopped racing, there's so many other things I can put that time towards, but they're things that I'm not as proficient in, or I'm not as, I don't know the outcome of those things. Fixing our barn roof, it's like, I know it needs to be done. I know I could learn it, but that means like, cool, I'm going to spend, 3 weeks in the summer not riding my bike, and every free moment up on a ladder on the roof, taking, tin off the roof and patching it, which is something I want to do. But at the moment, cycling's kind of like the easy escape. Like, oh, I'm good at this. I'm just going to stay in this lane because that roof's pretty high and it's a pretty old barn, and I don't want to fall through it. So it's easy for me at this point in my life to stay in this lane, as much as I also want to change lanes and try something different.
I mean, who knows, Ian? You could very well become the next tin roof barn influencer. I mean, I'm sure that's a niche waiting to be filled. We didn't even get to talk today about, your experience and your depth in podcasting, but I'd love to have you back in the future to dig in on that because, storytelling is a big part of your DNA as well. But I want to thank you for being here today and for sharing about your journey. This has been awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm seeing at the top of my screen, it says choose the hard way. And I think that's one thing that I will say in closing, that there is no substitution for hard work. I get asked all the time, how do you make it to the world tour? And it's like, there really is, there are shortcuts people take, but they always come back and bite them in the ass in the end. Like, there is no substitution for like putting your head down and just getting it done, whether that's business, sport, parenthood. Sometimes you can't go over it, you can't go through it, around it. You just have to go through it. You really do have to go, through that hardship to get to where you want to end up.
To learn more about Ian, go to @Ian_Boswell on Instagram. That link is in the show notes. I make this podcast free to encourage more people to have fun doing hard things because they are the best things in life. Before you go do something that's hard and fun, please take a moment to rate this show 5 stars on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, leave a positive review, and share this episode with a friend who likes doing hard things. Go to choosethehardway.com to sign up for the newsletter. Choose the Hard Way is a Big Truck production. Anthony Palmer at Palm Tree Podco is the producer and editor of this show. And I want to say thanks to Anthony for connecting me to Ian for this interview. If you'd like to hear another great interview with Ian, go check out his appearance on Anthony's show, Wake Dad, Drink Repeat. Emily Miles is head of digital and marketing. Jeffrey Nebellini is the world-renowned designer who is extremely well-dressed behind our brand identity and the Choose the Hard Way logo. The content for the show is created by me, Andrew Vontz. You can find me on social @HardwayPod.